Chapter 13, IT Security Policy Implementations. Let's take a look at the learning objective and the key concepts. Under learning objective, we have describe issues related to information system security, or ISS, policy implementation and enforcement. The key concepts are simplified implementation process, target state, executive buy-in, and cost and impact. Policy language, development and implementation strategies for security awareness policies, and policy implementation issues. Figure 13-1 gives you an overview of the process flow for implementing IT security policies. This figure shows a simple process flow for implementing IT security policies. As you can see by the figure, implementing a security policy is much more than writing and publishing a document. In fact, writing and publishing a policy document is a small part of a large process. Creating an IT security policy is less about the document and more about the control environment the policy creates. A policy is a way of implementing a control, such as a way to prevent or detect a type of security breach. So simply publishing a policy in itself doesn't prevent or detect a security breach. Overcoming technical hindrances to policies. Distributed infrastructure. Security policies apply throughout the enterprise. As such, they rely on centralized view and control of risk. You design a central set of policies and apply them across the enterprise. However, today's technology is highly decentralized. Smart devices are mobile. Users' laptops and desktops have tremendous computing power. Remote offices have servers and complex data closets supporting local networks. These are just a few examples. Today, many organizations also have substantial resources stored in a cloud. The term distributed infrastructure stands for an organization's collection of computers, including laptops, tablets, and smartphones, networked together and equipped with distributed system software so that they work together as one, even from various locations. Outdated technology. Another challenge for describing a target state is how to deal with outdated technology. This is hardware or software that, because it's obsolete, makes it difficult to implement best practices consistently. Outdated technology generally does not adhere to current best practices. When that occurs, you must decide how to address the lack of security controls within policies. You have four basic choices. 1. Replace the outdated technology. 2. Write security policies to best practices and issue policy waivers for outdated technology that inherently cannot comply. 3. Write security policies to the lowest, most common standard that the technology can support, even if it's outdated. Write different sets of policies for the outdated technologies. The ideal solution is to replace all outdated technology. However, that's not always an option, especially in a declining economy when many organizations are cutting costs. When it comes to a lack of standardization throughout the IT infrastructure, to fix the problem, ultimately you will need senior managers, formal buy-in and support for any costs they need to incur. When dealing with executive management, define expectations clearly. Senior executives generally have little time to create specific strategies. They expect well-defined security approaches and recommendations. You might need their input on undecided key issues. However, executives expect you to do your homework and to engage their teams. You should have already spoken to their staffs and worked out most of the details. When a CISO, Computer Information Security Officer, is in front of an executive to talk about implementing security policies against a target state, it should be a short conversation. The conversation should focus on, this is our recommended approach, and this is what I need. The executive will want to know the following at a minimum: the level of commitment being asked of his or her team, the impact of the policies on the current environment, the value the policy brings, in other words, what risk the policy addresses, and the metrics of success, how success will be measured. Expanded layers of control required for outdated technology. This is figure 13-2, which depicting these layers. So let's look. Assume it sometimes is less expensive to replace technology than to upgrade its security. And this figure illustrates that point. Let's assume you had outdated technology in your network. One response would be to improve segmentation controls to compensate. If you had outdated technology in the segment's network controls, you would place more reliance on operation system controls. If your operating system technology was outdated, you would place greater reliance on application controls. Any combination of the enhanced controls might mitigate some of the risk of outdated technology. Of course, all these additional layers of controls would increase cost to the organization. Target state, business risk, describes how the policy will reduce risk to the business and, more specifically, how it will reduce risk to an acceptable level. Compliance describes how the policy will ensure the business is compliant with laws and regulations. This is particularly important with regulated industries such as healthcare and credit cards. Threat vectors describe how the policy will prevent, mitigate, or detect IT security threats. Executive buy-in. Executives want to know the level of commitment being asked of his or her team. This is mainly because a lot of times their team is stressed out, overworked anyway. They want to make sure that they can support you. The impact of the policies on the current environment, the value the policy brings, in other words, what risk the policy addresses, and the matrix of success, how success will be measured. Executive management sponsorship. Users more likely to participate in security awareness training and support policy implementation when executives support that decision. Funding required to implement policies, communication from management supporting the program, and multiple executive supporters. Overcoming non-technical hindrances to policies. First is distributed environment. Many organizations operate in a distributed environment. Organizations are typically divided by lines of business, product, or geography. In a distributed environment, an organization is run by different individuals with different business objectives. Therefore, different parts of an organization can have different views of risk. This diverse set of leaders can delay security policy implementation. The first challenge is to get senior leadership to agree on a common set of security policies. The second challenge is agreeing on an implementation timeline. Then we have user types. A diverse set of views is not just reflected by leaders. The organization's general population also harbors a diverse set of views. The workplace has many types of users. Remember that you operate in an existing culture. That culture may not share the principles stated in the security policies. Even in the best of circumstances, it takes time for security policies to change the culture. In the meantime, you must recognize the type of culture and users that exist at the time the security policies are being implemented. Then we have organizational challenges. Organizational challenges depend on the culture and industry. For example, the financial service industry puts significant resources into implementing security policies. In these organizations, the focus is on how to implement security policies to meet compliance laws and regulations. The policy language. You need to ensure clear agreement on the target state. You need to create a clear and concise policy and language that is easily understood. You also need to avoid imprecise language such as should. You need to assign clear accountability to specific roles and state the specific resources covered by the policy. And you need to avoid requiring use of specific products. Employee awareness and training. Opportunity for employees to acquire new skills leading to improved job satisfaction, reinforcing core organizational values, and opportunity for management to demonstrate support. Motivation. Management should hold users accountable for failing to follow policies. Effective security policy implementation depends on acceptance. Acceptance depends on the individuals who perceive value in the policy. Ultimate acceptance depends on the value being demonstrated by lowered risk to the organization. And security awareness and training is an opportunity to communicate value and get employees motivated. Let's take a look at network access control. First is new employee and or contractor. At the time of hire, before access to data is granted. Okay? And then promotion, as individuals are promoted into significantly different roles. So you only give people access to what they need when they need it. You don't give people higher access than they actually need. Of course, you don't give one lower, they can't do their job. Then you have all users, annual refresher training. Post-incident, if you have an incident after major security instances when lack of education was noted. And then the vendor, as defined in the contract. Conducting security awareness training sessions, classroom training or computer-based training, you really have to decide what's best for your organization and which one will be most effective, timely, and actually the cost to the organization. But you first need to look at outcomes. If your people or typically get more out of a classroom training session, that's what you need to do. But today most companies do computer-based training. Then you need to gather feedback, anonymous surveys after the session to see if you were successful, and focus groups, interviews of attendees, exit interviews of individuals leaving the company. This is super important. A lot of companies don't do it, and even if they do it, they half-heartedly do it. You really need to vigorously do this interviews and actually use the data to make change. Then monitoring compliance through incident reports. Human resources, ownership of new employee orientation. These are things they need to do. Add security awareness training to the list of items that HR department provides to new employees. You don't want new employees to access sensitive data until they receive training. And you want to get to the employees as early as possible. The sooner you get to a new employee about anything, the quicker they will experience success. Review of acceptable use policies, or AUPs. The AUP clearly defines what's considered acceptable and unacceptable use of technology. It also defines personal responsibilities, such as protecting one's own password, and addresses other high-risk behaviors, which should be included in security training. Handling and sharing of sensitive customer information, transmission of information outside the company, and handling of company intellectual property. These are some examples of information dissemination and how to educate your employees. Formal versus informal. Learning methods, culture, audience, communications plan, hard copy, posting on the internet, email, brown bag lunch and learning sessions. Let's look at some of these just at random. Hard copy, a lot of people, especially certain age groups, they're used to paper. They want hard copy to refer to. Formal versus informal. Some people get more out of a formal structure, and some are more informal, where they just want people to talk to them one-on-one or in small groups. Learning methods, some want computerized, some want in person. The culture has a lot to do with your learning experience, if it's open or threatening. So you have to look at the culture to know what your outcomes will be. Who's your audience? Posting on the internet, email, brown bag lunch sessions can work really well for small groups. Policy implementation issues, page 2. Implementation is as much about changing attitudes as it is about implementing controls. Overcoming perception and changing culture is one goal of security policies. In other words, it is about implementing a way that wins hearts and minds. Policy implementation issues, page 2. You have to have personal accountability, directives, and enforcement. A rule does no good unless it's enforced. The value of security policy, that has to be a cultural thing, and it has to come from the very top. Governance and monitoring. A governance policy ensures that policies are used, adopted, and effective. They create a governance policy committee, usually made up of security teams and business side leaders. Governance sets direction through prioritization and decision making. They monitor the effectiveness of the security policy, number of successful breaches, and number of security attacks successfully defended against. Best practices for IT security policy implementations. Integrate the policy into day-to-day operations, educate end users, and create support. Case studies and examples. Example of implementation. The Chief Information Officer magazine is a good source. Assess the current state of security. Implement monitoring to have an ongoing understanding of what is happening on the network. Set security measures and controls. Foster a dynamic security culture. Another example of implementation is the SANS Institute. White paper on building and implementing a security policy provides examples of how to structure specific security policies. In the public sector, South Carolina Department of Revenue had a massive data breach, the exposure of 3.6 million taxpayers' personal information records, and 660,000 business tax-related records. This was a serious breach. SANS recommended monitoring. This is an overview policy stance. Explain your chosen policy stance. Choosing a stance to adopt in relationship to the planning, implementation, and monitoring of your security policy is critical. Defining the potential stances as, once again, been done for you in that there are accepted standards as follows. Promiscuous, everything is permitted, which in effect equates to having no security in place. Permissive, everything not explicitly prohibited is permitted. This is considered high-risk stance since the default is to allow, in order for security to be effective under this stance, your prohibited list and associated configurations must be fully up to date at all times. Prudent, everything not explicitly permitted is prohibited. This is considered the best option for commercial organizations since the default action is deny. Forgetting to expressly permit something carries minimal risk. Paranoid, nothing is permitted. Whilst this is the option of choice for military, health service, and security service type organizations, it compromises the availability target and is therefore often not acceptable in a commercial organization. In summary, we simplified implementation process. We covered target state, executive buy-in, cost, and impact, policy language, development and implementation strategies for security awareness policies, and policy implementation issues. Thank you so much for listening to this PowerPoint.